Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hello, friends. Welcome into episode 197. I'm really excited about this episode in particular because I think it is perhaps the most introspective and I was going to say psychological. We definitely hit a lot of psychology things in here when it comes to mindset and kind of getting past barriers and more specifically, how to keep going on either a project or your business when you just feel like giving up. My guest in this episode, Robbie Swale, is an author. He's also kind of a life and business coach, and he has a great book called The 12-Minute Method that we kind of hash out in this episode. But more importantly, his newest book called How to Keep Going When You Want to Give Up. That is really what we dive into in this episode. Initially, we were going to talk more about how to start when you're feeling stuck, and I'm sure as a web designer, you can relate to the experience that I had a lot, which was where you're all fired up to start a design and you're looking at a white screen or maybe even a basic wireframe and you've got nothing. And you're like, how do I have nothing? I've got no creativity. I just feel zapped. I can't even get started on this. We talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, we talk about how to keep going in that mental state when you are on a project and you're just stuck, or maybe you're just stuck in your business as a whole. Like maybe you're at a low point where you are seriously considering just giving this up. Robbie has a lot of tips and really incredible mindset strategies to help you get through those seasons in life. Again, whether it's a small thing on a project or whether you're at a low point in your business and you're really considering just calling it quits. And if that's you right now, I hope that this episode comes at perfect time because Robbie was really an awesome mind to get to know and to hear his thoughts on this. And I share, of course, what I've learned about, pushing and getting through some of these type of seasons. I really hope it helps you as well, particularly those of you who are in a low point. So hit me with your feedback. Hit me with your thoughts on this one. You can go to the show notes at joshhall.co/197. And before we dive in and before we start talking with Robbie, one thing I have found that really helps, particularly with the analogy I mentioned earlier, when you just start a design and you're looking at a white screen and you got nothing. My design course, I have a website design course that shares the basic fundamentals all the way through some more advanced strategies for designing websites in particular. We talk color management, strategy, we talk layout, design. I go through so many different examples of websites and strategies for designing sites that will help you additionally through this type of low point that you might go through. So my website design course is open for you right now. If you'd like to go check that out, just go to joshhall.co/design and we'll have some fun in that one. I love talking design. So go in there after this episode, and I think this one and that course will help you really push through some blocks. So here we go. Here's Robbie. Let's talk how to keep going when you might want to give up. Robbie, welcome onto the podcast, man. What a pleasure to have you on, dude.
Oh, Josh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We had a couple reschedules, but by golly, we're here, pumped. You have a book, and the title, How to Start When You're Stuck, just stuck out to me like a giant red flag that was just like a beaming light, like, yes, this is exactly what I've felt and struggled with as a creative and as a web designer for years, even as in my level now, decade plus of designing websites and being an entrepreneur, it still happens. So I'm excited to dive into this topic. And I know a lot of my audience are facing this where I know for me, it was like you start a website and then boom, there's a blank screen and you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. So needless to say, I'm really excited to dive into this. Before we dive in, do you want to let everybody know, first off, where you're based out of? And then I'm curious, when someone asks you what you do, what do you tell them?
Yeah. Well, first, before you do that, remind me to do that. I'll forget the question if I'm not careful, but it is worth saying, I don't know who first said this, but I've heard a few people say it, we write the book we need ourselves. So me too, with that book that I've written. And even in the process of putting the book out, it was really useful that it was a book about getting stuck and, not, of battling procrastination, because there were times in the process of even getting the book itself out that I found myself falling into all the traps that I have fallen into when confronted with blank pages and the start of things that haven't started and all that kind of thing.
I could see the total irony when you start to write the book, How to Start When You're Stuck, and then you're just stuck when you get started. I could see it just play out perfectly.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about that, because in some ways the story of how I wrote the book is like the lesson I've learned, or a big part of the lesson I've learned about what I need to do when I'm getting stuck. Let's come to that. But yeah, I'm in London, in the UK, in Southwest London, in an area called Battersea, which in some ways is famous for a power station, which is on the front of a Pink Floyd album. So if people, especially in the US, have come across, I can't remember which album it is off the top of my head now. Can't believe I've forgotten that. But sometimes that's the thing that people have know Battersea from. But so I'm over in the UK. And when people ask me what I do, I mostly talk about, the book came out in December, so I'm still adapting to calling myself an author sometimes, because it's like, I don't know, I think sometimes our identity, our personal sense of identity lags behind the things we've done.
It's one reason I like asking that, because I do so many things. You do so many things. You're a coach, you're an author, creative, we all do different things. So it's really hard to sometimes say exactly what we do.
Yeah, mostly what I say is that I am a coach, because underneath, that's where this business the way that I work for myself and that portfolio of things, that started with coaching, which started from really me asking the question, how do I find some work that is, more than what I was doing before, which had been actually working in the arts in the UK, managing arts venues. So I love that you used to be in a band, because I used to love being the venue where bands played and all that kind of thing. In some ways I used to love it, and in some ways the actual work I was doing wasn't the right thing for me. And I came to coaching. And now the way I talk about that is that there are kind of three main things that I'm interested in that coaching. So I'm interested in leadership. And this, I mean leadership in a really broad sense. Often it is people in organizations, but it's also often entrepreneurs or people starting their own businesses in the client work that I do. And the theme that's emerged there for me over the last 6-7 years that I've been doing this is around, often the clients that I'm working with are coming with a question about how to succeed or go to a new level of success, and a challenge that they feel like to get there, they have to, on some level, compromise who they are or do it in a way that they don't want to do it. And so the challenge is, how do we get to that new level of success without having to compromise who we are? And that's in the kind of leadership piece. I love the craft of coaching. And so I do some work supporting other coaches. I just think that way of supporting people has so much to offer the world right now. And I love thinking about that. And so I do some work supporting coaches. That's where my podcast is. It's a podcast for coaches. And I run a community there as well. And then the last part is creativity. And I mean that in the space of, how do people who start something from nothing? And so it is, a book, it could be a business, could be a creative project, could be just creating change or a new habit. But that, the question that I'm interested in is why do we sometimes really know what we want to do? At least on some level, we think we do, and yet we're not doing it. And sometimes months or years go past. And that's been me. And that's where the book comes in, really, the answer I know answer that question. Yeah. And I just interestingly on that thing of when you have a big portfolio like this, how do you talk about your work? I had a new thought the other day about it, actually, that in my work, the types of work that I do, those are the things that I'm interested in, right? Leadership, coaching, and creativity. And actually in my week and in my work, I realized that I need to have space to do all three of those things myself. I need to have some space to lead and to coach and to create. And that's quite a new thought for me. And I've been splitting my time between the kind of coaching and the creating to make sure both of those happen. But it's quite a new thought for me to think
it's challenging too
as well. Yeah,
it's really challenging. And for this audience, mainly of web designers and webpreneurs, it's the same thing. You're balancing a few different main things in the case of getting clients, communication with clients, working on your projects, and working on your business. It's those three big things that are really tricky. But if it makes anyone feel better, you're not alone. all entrepreneurs are generally managing at least 3 big chunks of work in a week. And for me, it's the same thing. It's like, it's coaching, it's content creation, and then it's creativity and learning as well, all in there. And I have to be careful about how I balance that as well. And it all kind of leads into getting stuck, I think, because I feel like getting stuck for me was often because I had too many things going on and I just was like paralyzed. Is that kind of what you felt? And by the way, before you answer that Pink Floyd album was Animals. With the, I looked it up real quick because I was trying to remember too. Yeah. That had the power station on there. But yeah, what was some of the hurdles for you personally, Robbie, where you felt stuck? And are those the things that prompted this book?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that there's a way in which too many possibilities is one of the signs that you're in the 21st century and you're a human. Right. It's like, it's almost good. Like if you're those things, like probably, which everyone listening probably is, depending on how long this podcast stays online. I guess we might have some 22nd century people listening at some point. But it's like that there's so many distractions and possibilities. And it's like, that's a wonderful thing. But it is one of the things you're likely to be facing if you are, alive and operating in the world, because there's just so many ways you could go. And also I think there's a thing in most people's journeys, and this is interesting, this isn't quite where I was. Let me come to where I was when the book emerged in a sec. But I think I see this in a lot of the work I do with leaders. There's like a way that people get to one level of success by saying yes. So you say yes to a lot of stuff, you do a lot of things, you kind of take advantage of all the opportunities that come your way. And then there comes a point where it gets the next level of success. You can only get there by learning to say no and saying no and yes to the right things.
That's a great point.
And I've had that problem, but that wasn't the one that prompted the book really. I think the book was prompted by possibly like a even more fundamental creative challenge. And again, I want to make it really clear, especially for the audience, that starting a business or having a side hustle or having the thing that you want to do that isn't what you're doing most of the time, that's all creative, right? Because creativity is about change and agency and something happening that isn't happening currently. Like that's basically the definition.
Well, and you said too, this was kind of an outlet for you because it was something you were going through as well. Like you wrote the book you needed. So I wonder if maybe there was an aspect of like, was this kind of a research experiment for you? Was it kind of like a case study in helping yourself out? Because if there wasn't the book on it, you write the book and then you figure it out.
Yeah, like accidentally it absolutely was all that. So what actually happened was I was just really kind of scared and stressed about creativity. So I was starting the coaching business. And alongside that, I kind of knew I needed to be more public facing in some way. Like I knew that it was going to hold me back if I found it, which was what was happening at the time. I found it stressful to kind of post anything online. Like even, yes, things that I'd made myself. But even like a joke on Facebook, I'd got to this point where, and this is like 2016, where even like if I had it used to be when I was worrying, I guess, less, or I was a bit younger, I would if I had a funny thought or something I wanted to share, I would just share it. By 2016, maybe the atmosphere on Facebook had changed because the crazy stuff happened in 2016 over in the US and in the UK and in the kind of political sense, and things had got a bit nastier. And I think the Facebook platform had changed a bit. But I had that. I wouldn't even make the jokes because it felt like too scary on some level. Certainly made me feel anxious. That's an interesting point. Yeah. I'm going to remember the tension in my chest.
I dealt with that too. I never thought about that. I've never talked about that, but I felt like that too. I was previously just whatever my thoughts were, I would share it without any thought of repercussions or whatever. And then once I got to a point where, particularly when I started having a family and then I became more, I guess, mature in some ways. And once I had a professional brand that was growing online, then suddenly I was much more careful and much more aware, which I think is natural. But now I'm almost reverting back. Now I'm back to like, I don't give a freaking flying crap what anyone thinks. I'm just going to share what I think and then they can take it or run with it or whatever.
Yeah, my jokes about coffee need to make a comeback to my social media. They've been absent for many years, and they're definitely making a comeback, and the football ones as well. So basically, I knew that something was up there, and I knew it was to do with my business. But also I'd read a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And one of the things he says in that book, it's a great book about creative battles. And one of the things he says is he talks about procrastination and fear and all that sort of stuff under this umbrella concept of resistance. And he says something like, the places where we feel the most resistance are the most important for our soul's evolution. So basically the things that we procrastinate and fear the most, actually, if we can do them, will help us grow and learn and all that kind of thing more than anything else.
I love that.
Those two things at once, kind of having a feeling that might be true, and also knowing that in my business, I kind of I wanted to be able to be present in the public online world. And also, so kind of three strands to it, I wanted to be doing some writing. And this was kind of hard for me to admit at the time. Like it definitely wasn't explicitly what I was saying, but I was working on that. I was kind of envious of the people who could just write something and post it online, or had a blog going back a long time, all those kinds of things. So I took all this to my coach. So I was starting a coaching business. One of the best things for anyone starting a coaching business to do is hire a coach. Because if you're starting, in fact, there's a way in which a business is likely to throw you up against the kind of limits of your mindset, and it's going to show you the ways that you need to grow. And having someone, it doesn't need to be a professional coach, but it could be a colleague or a community, but someone you can work through that stuff with is really vital. And I basically took this challenge to my coach, Joel, and over a few months, we created a way for me to battle through this thing. And the initial thing was, Joel used to be a painter in a previous life, like I think he was a painter and decorator, but also like an artist, a visual artist. And he said when he was a visual artist, he liked to create a series of paintings. And we talked about how I liked my commute. I was working part-time in an office, part-time coaching at the time. And I would do this like short train journey into the center of London. And I liked that. It was like free time, where I didn't feel any of my pressure and anxiety.
Podcast time, reading.
Podcast time, book time, all that stuff. And what if the suggestion was, for a couple of weeks, it could be writing time? And so I could create a series of articles on the train. And it was going to be called the Train Series. And the task was, write while the train's moving. I was doing this on my phone with my thumbs. Stop when the train stops, and proofread it just once, and post it on LinkedIn. And I chose LinkedIn because I thought no one read LinkedIn. And I think that was a bit more true in 2016. It's more of a blogging platform now. But
this wasn't like write and then eventually make it a book. This was like write, publish, right?
Yeah,
check,
right.
Quick, go.
So now if we think about it, it was practicing those two things. It was practicing writing, which I kind of knew I wanted to do, and it was practicing sharing things online. But that was where this started. And what happened in those 5 sessions, I think it was 5 times in the next 2 weeks, was like, it didn't feel nice. It felt kind of scary and uncomfortable, but it felt kind of good or right. Like, some people did like it. I don't think anyone commented on the first couple. Maybe they did by the 3rd or 4th or 5th. But there was this sense, some people are listening. And my fears hadn't come true. Like the world hadn't ended. And no one had laughed at me online. They might have privately laughed, but I don't care about that. I cared about publicly, all those fears that we sometimes have about putting things out there. And so I decided that I would keep that practice going, but I would make it weekly because that was more manageable. And I think I said I would do it till Christmas. And then that was August till Christmas, so a few months of weekly. And I decided to keep it going. And I've now been writing an article every week using that practice for the last 5.5 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
So there's like 230 of them or something now. And at some point I stopped getting the train and I had to work out. So I thought, what happens when I don't get the train? I don't want to stop this practice. So I timed roughly the train journey. It was about 12 minutes. And so when I stop getting the train as much, and this is what I do now, I set a timer for 12 minutes, write while the timer's going, stop when it stops, proofread it once and post it. And that is essentially the 12-minute method, which is how I wrote the book, came from that.
And I like that. And I know that has a lot of ingredients of like is it the Pomodoro technique, where you basically, you've got like 30 minutes, you do this, and as much as you get done, you double check it, you ship. You ship. And I really think that's probably one of the most important practices to have when you're stuck, is to like give yourself a deadline, give yourself a time limit, and just do what you can do. Even if you think it's trash, get it out there. Now, it's also different designing a website versus like publishing a blog post online, because if you're publishing a website, you can get all the trash out, and then the next day all your good ideas finally come in, which is what I found as a creative. Usually day one was when all the bad stuff gets out, and then day two is when the good stuff gets out. Have you found that too? Like when you're stuck, you feel like you just got to get through the bad ideas, then you'll find the good ideas?
Yeah. So I think there's so much in what you've just said. There's kind of two parts of that. Like, one is, don't forget that like each time, so if we think about the writing example, but I could give other examples from other parts of my business and maybe ones that other people have used too. But if we stay with the writing for a start, like one is you get better. So there's a reason that so my second, or certainly my 20th article is better than my first that I've written in 12 minutes, because I've been practicing. And practice is just, for me, it's really important to think in terms of practice. So that's a part of it. There's another part of it, which is if you keep going, like with building your website, if you're doing it if it's a side hustle, for example, like, or you're working somewhere else, most of the week, if you've only got an hour to spend on it, well, like each time you spend an hour on it for a week, you increase the chances of the gold coming out. Of the golden work happening. And what I definitely have found is it's important to remember that, I think one of the things I wrote in the book is, it's like we think that we need to wait for inspiration and the good idea to start. But mostly my experience has been, if we start, then inspiration shows up. And it turns out it's been there the whole time, but it's just like, once you get going, suddenly the good idea will come, or 3/4 of the way through writing an article, the actually interesting thing will come out, or you'll finally solve the problem that you've been thinking about in your web design for 3 days. But you'll solve it partway through trying to solve it, or the idea for another piece will come midway through trying to solve something else,
Yes, I found the best ideas and inspiration for me in all of my endeavors have come in two ways, or two areas. Either just pushing through all the bad ideas until you find something, like you just said, or it'll be like Friday night randomly when I'm in the shower, and it'll hit me like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's the one. And then I have to rush out to write it down before I forget it. That's always how it's gone. Even to this day, it'll be like, if I'm stuck on an idea or a topic or whatever it is, it seems to come to me in the most random places. It's never like when it's planned, because creativity is hard to plan. I think that's we could probably cover 1,000 reasons why we get stuck, but creativity is so hard to plan, is it not?
It absolutely is. I was just laughing when you're saying that about the shower. I once went to a workshop, and the guy running the workshops asked everyone, like, when do you do your best thinking? And they said, like, the shower, when I'm out for a run, talking to a friend. No one said, when I sit down and think really, really hard. Right? It doesn't happen like that. It's also, I think, really important what you just said. So there's two things that feel important about it to me. So Adam Grant, in his book Originals, which is a really great read, it's the only one of his books that I've read, but he's a really interesting guy, really good at taking the kind of cutting edge of psychology and making it really interesting to read and applicable to people. He talks about in Originals, which essentially is a book about how do you be creative or innovative, or what are the people who do the unusual things. What do they do differently? He talks about what he calls creative procrastination. So essentially the psychology research behind what you've just said, and I can't remember the research, but his conclusion is exactly the same as what you've said, that if you set your subconscious on a problem, then you leave it for a while, it doesn't necessarily, if just because you're actively not thinking about the problem, that doesn't mean the creative back rooms of your mind aren't working away at it. And often it does emerge. It's like, and you've got to then capture it. So a really good creative practice for your business, for your, your writing, whatever it is to have the notepad, or a really fun one is like voice recorder ready on your phone.
Yeah.
So when you have it ready,
I used to do that You mentioned me being in a band. Like, I remember the most awkward when I used to be a cabinet maker for a tour bus customizing shop. And I would get these like riffs in my head, or these metal riffs or guitar. Even though I was a drummer, I still had like a lot of musical input on our stuff. And I would get like an idea, and I would go into the bathroom and I would pop up my voice recorder and I'm like, da, 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 da. And then every once in a while a worker would walk in on me and be like, Josh, what the hell are you doing in here? And I'm like, this is awkward, but I'm in a band and I had to get it out of my head. That's exactly what I experienced. And it's different.
I bet you had this amazing thing though after that, right? Which is you get to then, you've probably the great thing about doing it on voice rather than writing is then you go back to the recording, like sometimes weeks later, you find it and you've completely forgotten it. And you hear this amazing idea, or in your case, this amazing riff coming out of the phone in your own voice. And you're like, oh, that is good. And I can't even remember coming up with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think you could potentially use the voice recorder for stuff if you just jot down like an idea or a framework, or if you get a chance to write it down, or like literally this happened over the weekend. I had an idea and I just grabbed my laptop and just wrote it as a note real quick and saved it. And I was like, I'll worry about this Monday, but at least this Saturday night, I got it out of my head. I can spend time with my family and be present instead of letting it lingering. Cause when it lingers, that's when it seems like it just takes over.
Yeah, so really, you're right. It's also a really good presence practice. So if you want to be able to get something out of your head, an idea is a good one, or to do is another good one. But sometimes just like general worry, writing it down, getting it out of the head often does that. And that's a really good practice. Just to catch one more thought that I've got hanging that I don't want to let go for this exact reason. It's the same thing. It's like the great thing about, one of the things I found out from the writing practice, was the great thing about having a regular practice when you're going to create something is that it makes you save up ideas. So because you don't want to show up. So I knew that by Friday every week, I would be setting a time. I still know this. I'd be setting a timer for 12 minutes. And that meant that I was on the lookout then for the thing I would write about in that time. And it's like, if essentially it's an interesting experiment to know that you'll be writing at that time, and pretty much know that you'll only be writing at that time. Or it could be know that you'll be working on your business at that time and only at that time. Then in the back of your mind, in the build up to that, what happens is you're thinking like, what's an interesting thing that I could be working on in that time? And what's the most important thing that I could be working on in that time? Mm-hmm. And then you get to a kind of high leverage place as well as a creative place, because it's like, I'm only going to write one 12-minute article this week. Like, what's the best one for me to write this week? And at first, that wasn't what I was worried about. I was just like, what could I write about this week? Have I got an idea? And now it's like, well, what am I really present to this week that I can write about better this week than anything else?
So it went from did it go from do I have an idea to what is my best idea? Is that kind of how that works?
That's the kind of thing. Well, also if you're catching your ideas, and probably can't see it, I've got some I don't want to pull them off because they'll probably pull off part of my wall. Got some. I haven't got a notepad, notice board. I've just got a wall with some blue tack, but I've got some very messy sheets, which when I have the idea, I'll be like, maybe I'll get one in this. I'll be like writing it down. So yeah, at first it was, what am I even going to write about? And it would be like on the train sometimes, or sometimes even an interesting practice was, if I know I'm going to do it, the very least, like really taking that inspiration piece to heart, I'm going to sit down with the blank page. The train was really good for that because it meant there was no procrastination about starting. If it got to Friday and the train journey, that was my last train journey of the week, I had to do it then.
I'd do it.
And so I just had to get my phone up and see what emerged. And the first pieces, they were about what was going on. They were about the train and lessons that emerged and thoughts that emerged from that. And then sometimes they were about, like, I would be on the way and I'd be thinking, oh no, I've got to think of something good to write about now because I've got to write on this train journey. And then the idea would come. And then as time went on, I realized what a powerful thing it is to be capturing those ideas in the way that we've been talking about.
Gotcha. Now I'm curious, this might be a different practice than other types of content creation, to where, like, for me, I tend to try to batch a lot of my podcasts. Like, I got a few podcast interviews this week, none next week, and then maybe one the week after, but I'll probably kick back up the following weeks to kind of batch record and have them saved up. This writing practice, I feel like, is a little bit different, right? Like, my question would be, what are your thoughts on, like, writing 4 blog posts 1 week and then having 3 weeks off versus having a weekly practice? What's the difference there, good or bad?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that, like, I don't have a judgment on either, right? As long as with the batching one, it definitely happens. So so what happened with the post was about 3 years in, I got to thinking, Seth Godin published a giant compilation of a load of his blog. And that just gave me the thought, do you know what? I could put a compilation of my blog together, because about 3 years in, I had about 150 of them, been writing pretty much one every week. And they're on LinkedIn, which is actually as a blogging platform, it's fine as a posting and good, quite nice for having little bits of organic sharing, but it's not very good for finding 150 articles that someone's read and reading them. And so even people who wanted to do that wouldn't have been able to do it. And I thought, well, what if I make this into a book? And then I thought it'd be funny because I could call it, I wrote this book in 12 minutes as a way to provoke people into getting off their asses and making the thing that they wanted to make. And then I talked to my friend Steve, who was going to help me do a bit of editing on what was just going to be the blog posts in order in a book form. And he said, such a good title. Can we make the book about that as well? Like, is there a way to package these blog posts that you've written over the first 3 years into a story about how to like get off your ass and make something?
Gotcha.
And what was really amazing was that that basically, because I'd been writing in that kind of weird way that we've just been talking about, where I had to like write about what I was interested in or what was on my mind over 3 years. And what I'd been doing over those 3 years was fighting my own creative battle, like getting over this procrastination about sharing things online, getting out there with my business much, much more. And the business I'd been doing was coaching, which is essentially helping someone do something they want to do, but can't quite do. What I'd been writing about almost all the time was, how do I go from this kind of creative hell of stuckness into action? And so I sat down and I dealt out the pieces, essentially. I printed them all off, 140 of them, 150 of them, and dealt them out into the stages of the creative process. And it was amazing, because what I'd done accidentally was create not just a body of work, not just 140 blog posts, but something quite coherent once I'd pulled out a few pieces that didn't quite make sense and a few duplicates. And that's essentially not just this book, but in the end, I decided it worked better as a series of 4 books that are going to come out this year, written in this way. And I guess the reason I tell the rest of that story now is, like, I've been working on the second book, which is about keeping going. It's going to be called How to Keep Going When You Want to Give Up, right? Because if like starting is the number one condition to doing great work, not giving up after 1 week or 10 weeks is the number 2 condition.
Great point.
And the insight that I really had working on that book, it'll probably be out in, I don't know, May 22, something like that, is like that this practice for me was the tortoise and the hare, right? It was that fable, and the story of that, of course, is that, it's all very well being really fast, but if you stop for a massive rest, then some tortoise walking along at one article for 12 minutes every week for a few years will overtake you in the end.
Yeah, that's good.
And so like I'm all in favor of fast and intense, like doing loads every week will get you more than doing a little bit every week, but mostly over a period of years, like the tortoise does beat the hare. And some of those people that I was envious of at the start of my journey when I was thinking about writing, who'd written 50, 100, 150 blog posts when I hadn't even started, I've now written more articles than, because they have stopped and slowed down. So it's certainly not, I think like doing loads and batching, like whatever, essentially the game is, given all the distractions in the world, given all the things you could be doing, given those challenges of choice, given how we're often juggling, especially when we're starting something, we're juggling like the necessity of making money and having and living alongside making something new. The game is do whatever you need to do to make sure that you can do something consistently over a period of time. So I'm really glad, for example, that my practice was 12 minutes a week. But I've had people inspired by the 12-minute writing practice go to 12 minutes a day and get their books done before mine, right? And that's great. But 12 minutes a day would have been too much for me. I would have given up. I would have slipped and stopped. And so if the game is to create something magical, then the most important thing is that you start it and you keep going. And just the last thing to say, one of the really amazing things that I have discovered through this practice is I have never had anything in my life that I committed to doing every week and that I have kept going for as long as this. And that's a kind of amazing thing to realize. Like, so a big insight for me in my journey has been that, confidence is a result of action. So I always used to you used to want to wait for confidence to start. And that's a terrible bind to put yourself in, because confidence only comes after you've started. It only comes after you've done things. And a weird piece of confidence that I have now is that if I set my mind to it and build the habit right and choose to commit to it, then actually I can be confident I am someone who can keep to a habit over a period of years. And what's interesting about that is it basically makes, this is going to sound grandiose, but it basically makes anything possible. Because if you commit to something,
it's like muscle memory. It's like muscle memory. You just get used to doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have the sense that I have the sense that I won't give up unless, and so it's interesting now when I notice that I'm not keeping a commitment on a weekly or monthly or whatever basis, it's like I have to really think, what am I doing here? What am I not doing here that in my 12-minute writing practice or my Duolingo streak or my my podcasting or my business, what am I not doing with this new thing that I was doing in those places? And how do I build that in so that this is a thing that I don't flake out on?
Yeah. Well, and I like that. I think you summed it up there, which is in a given amount of time, as long as it gets done. There are different practices too, depending on the project. Like if you write a book, and this is a great, very timely conversation for me because I'm actually starting my first book next month at the time of recording this, Exciting. Which I'm super excited about. So I will very intentionally have like a dedicated weekly routine for sure. I'll probably time it out by day, get out of the house, go to a coffee shop where I tend to thrive when it comes like writing and creativity. That's my plan for that. Now, project kind of things are very different because they may come in waves, they may come and go. It's very different to balance that type of creativity when you're up against a deadline. And again, there's the money thing, there's everything else. But I think either way, that idea of just having that momentum and just getting the bad stuff out of your head and just doing something is key. And I often think about this back in my journey when I first started out, because I definitely struggled with the white screen syndrome, which is where like, all right, I'm ready to start this web design project. We've got a strategy in place. We've got the ideas. I got nothing. Like that's just the worst feeling ever. And it could come with books, come with design, comes with websites. But what I've learned over the years is that, and I now expect that. It used to catch me by surprise. Now I just know if it doesn't happen right away, it's going to happen at some point. I might get the homepage design, but then like the other pages I'm stuck on. What are your thoughts about that? About like, I don't want to be a pessimist, but have you learned that the resistance, as the War of Art puts it, are you just aware that it is going to come at some point in the process? No matter how pro you are, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's one of the many insights that I took from the War of Art that are powerful for me, and anyone who reads my book will see that, will kind of feel Stephen Pressfield's presence in it. But one of the biggest things from that book is that everybody has this. Like I used to use the story of my fear and my procrastination. The story I used to tell was they are a reason for me to not do these things because they're a sign that I'm not a creative person or that I'm not cut out to do these things. Mm-hmm. And he tells great stories in that book about people like that. You start collecting them after that, seeing how untrue they are. There's a really nice one with, I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but that Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, tells on the Tim Ferriss show. And it's something like he just builds into it. He knows in his writing day, he's basically he's got to sit down for 6 hours for every 2 hours of writing, because he knows the first 4 hours are going to be all his crazy procrastination happening. But he knows by now that he's got to just kind of like wait that out, surf it out until he gets to the moment where the magic starts to happen. And I think that's real. So I think there's probably two things I'd say about that. One is just know it's going to happen. Know that the fear, the resistance, the procrastination, all the voices in your head, they're not a reason that you can't do this. They're like what everyone has. And the more when you start, like happened to me, like if you choose to assume that, you start to notice all these very successful people telling their stories about how that happens. The other thing that I like to think about though is like there's the blank page, right? And it's coding, web design, they are absolutely creative acts in the same way that writing a book is. And the blank page is a great example of that. Like, it's just like, there's a place that I'm going to get to. There's a story that I'm going to tell. There's a thing that we're going to have at the end, and I have to make it from nothing. And the other thing that I always try and remember with that kind of thing is humility, essentially. And I can't remember who I heard say this. It might have been Seth Godin, might have been Pressfield. It's like, just think about truck drivers. Like, they never have truck drivers block. Right? They never get up one day and say, I just didn't have it in me to drive the truck today, I just didn't feel like it. I just didn't feel like a truck driver today. And so I didn't go out, right? They just got behind the wheel and they drive. And so it does feel like that's the answer to me. It's like, and it goes back a bit to what you were saying about the projects. It's just like, put the time in, turn off the distractions and do something. And if it's kind of crap the first time, that's okay. For all the reasons we've been talking about.
And it usually is too, particularly with the web design. I know vividly, even when I do designs today, it's like the first version is always not great. And even if I think the layout's going to be great for whatever reason, it's like, this is kind of crap. I might completely scratch this. I sleep on it, come back tomorrow, do a few tweaks, and then suddenly there's life there. And I found that to be true with every project I do. Even like, I'm editing a video right now for one of my videos on my YouTube channel. And the first version, I was like, I just feel like it's not great. But with a little bit of editing and a little bit of work on it, suddenly it's a whole new thing that is really cool. That point though, with distractions, I want to really hit on this for a sec, because that is like the culprit of any true creativity now. If it's going to be done, if it's creativity done, is limiting distractions and prioritizing the right things. I think it was Neil Gaiman who said, it may have been on the Tim Ferriss show, one of his podcasts, where he said with his writing practice, because he faces the resistance just like everybody else, but he said he would take, if I remember right, he would take a pen and go into a room, and he gave himself two options: no phone, no computer, no nothing, just pen and paper and nothing else. He said he didn't have to write, but the only other option was to just sit and think. It was it alleviated the like, okay, I've got to write this now. It's the only thing I can do. He gave himself another option, but the option was just to do nothing and sit there, and then it forced him to write. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think that practice may be worthwhile as a web designer of doing. Like, maybe whatever your office setup looks like, whatever it is, you have two options: design this homepage or don't, and just kind of think and just sit. But it's those two options: no Facebook, no other social media, no phone, no email, no nothing else, just those two options. I just wonder if that might be a good practice to help as well, like something practical that could be done to, help this stuck resistance period.
Definitely. I mean, going back to what you were saying before about what you're going to do with your book, that just sounds really wise and really, one of the things I love about having made something like my book and kind of called the series the 12-minute method is you see people doing what they should do with that idea, which is making it their own. And people are doing all kinds of things with it. And sometimes it's 12 minutes something, and sometimes it's 20 and 30 and more than that. And like you said, there's times for project work and all that kind of thing. But I think what is important is what you said about the coffee shop, right? It's some dedicated time. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to write a book or build a website. Writing a book could definitely be done well in taking yourself away to the mountains for 2 weeks in a place by yourself with no one else there, and ideally no phone reception, and banging it out. And that would be a great way to make something as well. A key is dedicated time. I think that's really helpful. And there's a couple of reasons that story is so good, isn't it? One is that it is taking distractions literally out of of Neil Gaiman's way. Yeah. And one of the things that someone once asked me, what are like the three, I can't remember what the question was, 3 things you think you've learned most about productivity. And one of the ones that came out of me then, which I just think, it's it's been such a useful thought for me to have, and I sometimes share it with people, is actually being humble about what we need to do to resist distractions. And the truth is, like, we kind of, and I've heard other people do this as well, it's easy to think like we should be kind of smart enough to not check Facebook when we are doing some work. We're just not. Like, let's not forget all that stuff out of the social dilemma on Netflix. It's like the smartest people in the world competing with each other to build the most distracting AI that's ever existed, millions of times more powerful than chess computers that beat Garry Kasparov. It's like, it's all there and they're all doing that. We're not smart enough to beat that. So you got to be humble. You got to do some things. You got to lock yourself in a room. Like
instinct always trumps knowledge too.
I unplugged the router. I can't do it as much since COVID because my wife's working at home as well. But I would unplug the internet in our apartment, in our flat, so that I couldn't go on it if I didn't need. It's more tricky when you're doing some work that you need to be connected to the internet for. But there are apps to stop you going on Instagram. I did a thing once where I'd already taken the apps off my phone for all these distracting things, but I would still go on the browser mobile web version sometimes. But it made a real difference to log myself out of Twitter, so that I got an extra chance. It's in the science and the psychology, they call it the activation energy of a task. So if you raise the activation energy of a task, i.e. you make it harder to just accidentally find yourself on Twitter, then if you raise the activation energy, it gives your conscious mind more chance to get involved. So logging out of Twitter meant that I would go on my browser, on my phone, I would just find myself there. My intuitive self, just trying to procrastinate, is there. But I would have to type in the password or even just press log in. That was enough usually for me to go, I logged out of this because I don't want to be on Twitter right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put my phone over there now. My phone right now, right? I mean, we're on a podcast, so that's another reason to do it. But it's over there on the other side of the room so that I can't accidentally get distracted by it. So I think that it is almost, there is almost no lengths that you can go to avoid distractions that aren't worth it. I think I got the double negative right there. I might not have, but you can't do enough basically to kind of to help yourself not get distracted when you want to really focus. And I think we're kind of agreeing in this call, and I definitely believe this, that one of the key ways to get the stuff that you want to do done is to basically create the conditions to do it and just sit there.
Yeah.
And either do it or don't do it, right? That is a really nice thing to say, but give yourself a choice. You're going to sit at your desk, or you're going to sit in your writing space, or you're going to take your laptop to the right cupboard in your house and you're just going to sit in it, and you've got the choice. You can code or you can do nothing, but you can't do either. The other cool thing about that though, as well, Josh, is the work or do nothing is that in the modern world, doing nothing is actually think about how popular mindfulness is and how valuable people know it is. Mindfulness is essentially doing nothing in a certain way. Yeah. We never do nothing. In a way, it's also what you're doing in the shower when you have the good ideas. So if you spend an hour doing nothing, this
is the time when the mind gets to relax, and then it's you give it some room to breathe, and then suddenly the ideas come. I remember vividly one website design. We did the initial design. The client wasn't real keen on it. So I just remember being stuck. And I just could not figure out what I wanted to do for this homepage. I sat in my office, I drew, I kind of just tried to force myself through it. And I was like, it sucks. I'm not getting it. I'm going to take my dog for a walk. And that's when it happened. I was on a walk, and I remember halfway through the vision in my head of what I wanted to do. And I'd hustle back to get it out of my head. But that's how it happens with mindfulness. And you give it some room to breathe. And it is, again, I want to go back to the trickiness of it, because I know personally, whenever I have times where I'm okay, I'm going to be creative and this is my 2-hour block, I get there and I'm dang it, I got nothing. Why do I not have this Monday at 10 a.m., but Friday night when we're getting ready for bed is when it strikes? For whatever reason, I've just come to assume that's how it's going to be, but I try to, get my version of it all out as best as I can.
Yeah, maybe for you, it's more like you've been saying, you collect the ideas. You can't go to, it sounds like it doesn't work for you to go to the Monday morning slot with no idea ready to work on. But I imagine if you've got the idea from Friday, and rather than be creative, that Monday morning slot is work on the latest idea that I've had. That's a different kettle of fish, right? That's
a great point. There's a big difference between actually producing the content for an idea and then coming up with the idea. So I'm really glad you fleshed this out. This has become quite the therapy session for me, because now I'm psychologically, I realize my ideas come from the most random times, the most random places, which is cool. I'm used to that. The production and the content creation typically comes out of the slots as long as I have the idea. But you're totally right. If I sit down on Monday and I have all the time in the world that day because I don't take calls on Monday to like come up with the ideas, I'm stuck. I got nothing. That's just the way it is. But I can produce the content. So for like my book, for example, I'll probably come up with the outline randomly. I mean, I'll have some intentional times, but I guarantee it'll be on a walk or something when I am like, oh, I should add this chapter of this story. And then those dedicated slots at a coffee shop or my book writing time, that's when I will actually produce and get the creativity out. For me personally, I'm not down with doing nothing generally. So I'll probably just either write well or not write so well, and then, tweak that as need be. That's my game plan, at least.
And I think, what you've said about how you work, but I've heard lots of other people say it. I've heard Brene Brown say it, lots of people, like with the way that you create websites, it's like, if it's a kind of rubbish first draft, that's like a great place to start from. And there's a lot, again, it's a different skill, and some people love and hate these different skills. It's a different skill to like come back and flesh out. And also remember, once you've got the rubbish first go, like that creative procrastination will start happening again. So I think the more you've done that, the more likely it is, in fact, that the cool ideas for, that bit about that should not have that story. And there's this other much better way of telling that, or you're doing a podcast interview and the guest tells a story and you're like, oh, that's the bit for the intro. This is exactly it. So it's like I guess sometimes people, I've also heard, interestingly, I've heard writers talking about how and this is like fiction writers, which I've never done, and I doubt I ever will, but like, some of them work from a plan. So they plan it all out, and then they write their first draft. But some don't work from a plan. And essentially what they do is their first draft, which they just write as it comes, becomes the plan. And sometimes you have to chuck the content of that pretty much all away. But because you've done the first go at it, you've got an idea for like, oh yeah, it's nothing like that, except that this is the story arc, except that now I've written the ending like this, it has to be actually completely different. But you've got that plan is basically the first go.
Well, and I think that's why getting stuck in the beginning is so common. Most people, especially in web design, don't get stuck at the end. You get stuck at the beginning because that's when there's everything going on and there's everything that needs to be planned. Like, designing a website, I would never get stuck after the homepage is designed and the main pages are designed and I just need to fill in content. I wasn't like, oh, I'm stuck on this particular button design. That typically wasn't an issue. It's the beginning. It's when there's nothing that is, at least for me, that's when I tend to see the most, stuckness, whatever you want to call it. It's the biggest hurdle to get over. But I think everything we've talked about so far we've really covered a lot of the challenges and solutions to those, because a lot of it's psychological. I mean, there's all sorts of different things that are in between there. Sometimes it is office and how your workspace, how you work, when you like to work, when you're productive, when the ideas come, when you feel productive as far as production and creativity, which is really fascinating. But yeah, that first hurdle seems to be always the biggest one, that blank page.
I think I wish I could remember what the actual research of this is. I need to look it up because I keep thinking about it. But I think there's research which shows, and this feels exactly true to my experience, and I think what you're saying, that like humans are really creative, but only when working within a set of constraints of some kind. Yeah. Like if you just say like be creative, then no human is creative. But if you say like make something that looks a bit like a monkey from the stuff in your room, then the right people will find something that looks vaguely like a monkey based on the t-shirt and the lamp and that kind of thing. And I think that's important. And then the other thing that I just thought about when you were saying that about the web design is, I think you're right about that. So that's why I think that might be one of the things that's going on. It's like once you've created essentially you might have to create your own set of constraints, which is done basically once the homepage is done, once the overall site architecture is in place, like the button just follows from that and flows from that. But coming from blank page or even like brief to something that is visible, that's the kind of biggest part of the creative act. And look, there's a reason that the start book is the book I put out first. It's because it's like that's the bit where you're going from this massive unmoving object to you start moving the boulder, and then the boulder rolls, and in the end the boulder is just rolling away. The only thing I would catch about the end is that I think that when it's something that's personal to someone, so maybe more like when it's someone launching their new business, then the end can be a killer part. They're like, my website is live and I'm going to post about it on social media and tell my friends. Like, that can be a really thorny moment too. But other than that, I think you're really right. There's something massive, isn't there, in that once we're rolling, once we've got the first draft or the plan or the site architecture done.
Well, and I've learned that with everything I've done too, even like in the physical realm. Like I remember when I did a half marathon years ago, the worst part was just getting started. Those first few runs, those were the biggest hurdles, but you build the muscle memory with that. You build the time, it's a routine that you fall into. It's a habit. That's when it happens. I think it's definitely the same with design and creativity. Even now as a course creator, like I have done 10 courses, so I know pretty much when the resistance is going to come. And it's always at the beginning. It's at the very beginning when I try to map out the course is generally when that's a big hurdle time. That's when the ideas come randomly. And then the first set of like video recording without fail, every time I sit down to do like 5 or 6 videos, the first one is the roughest one. And I always have to get through the fumbling and I always do multiple takes or I'll just let it go. And then once I get going, I'm in flow state and then I can cook through 5 or 6 videos, batch them out. And then I just, did a ton. I've found that to be true in every endeavor in the physical realm and the digital realm. That's always how it's gone. And you're right. Like there's definitely different kind of stuck moments. I think that might depend on marketing strategy, comfort as far as being extroverted or introverted on certain things. But yeah, it definitely seems like for me personally, it's always the beginning, always the start of the hurt. That's the biggest hurdle as far as feeling stuck. But everything we've talked about are really practical things that we can do, whether it is limit yourself with just do this or do nothing, give yourself time constraints and deadlines. That I'm a big believer in that, because I've often with courses set like a launch date to where I'm getting this course done, whether it's amazing or whether it's pretty dang good, it's going to be done. So I think those things help. I think actually constraints and limitations for creativity are key. And I don't know with your books, like, do you have deadlines with your books? Do you give yourself deadlines? Because otherwise, I mean, I could write this book for 3.5 years, but I know I don't want to write it more than maybe a couple months at the most.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to what we were talking about right at the start of the conversation. Like, I'd had a load of success with a particular goal setting exercise that I do use pretty much every year. I'd had loads of success with it until it came to these books. And then I kept falling down on it. They kept being on the list and then not getting done. And there were loads of good reasons for it, right? There were like, with the books, I was like, learning about the publishing industry, for example. And I at one point I was like, no, my whole thing is just like, get a thing out. Doesn't matter what it's like. Self-publishing is the way to go. And then I had this thought, which was about another book that I loved. And I thought, except if I could get that publisher to publish my book, that would be better, because that publisher and this book, and then amazingly, that guy did offer to publish this book and actually, another project that I'm working on. So I had this weird thing where in the end that became resistance, because it was clearly apparent when I started talking to the guy that he would have been the wrong person to do this book with. So I had this whole 2-year period from the book, the first idea of the book. It was 2 years, 3-4 months between first committing to doing the book, essentially getting the first draft of what's actually 4 books ready, and this first one coming out. And I had to keep reminding myself. It was like, I was like really questioning all of the things we've been talking about. And it's a big deal, actually, especially if your book is about getting things done and procrastinating. If you can't stop procrastinating, your whole thing is gone. It's not just, it's like none of it works. None of it's true anymore. So I had to do all kinds of things to get me over it. And of course, I found exactly what you just said, what we've been talking about, to be true, which is once the first one is done, so the second, which will come out soon, feels easy in comparison.
It does
it's
feel
like,
easier, yeah.
And some of that is practical because I now have a team that I'm working on this on. I know how it works, and all that kind of thing. And some of it is just the creation is going now, and my identity, like on a psychological level, one of the things that's happened is the identity shift. I think that I have to go through to have a second book out is nothing like going for the identity shift of going from no books to one book.
Yeah,
which is like, who am I to publish a book? Well, now I don't have to worry about that because I'm already that guy.
I felt like that as a course creator too. As when I did my first course, I'm like, who am I to do a course? And then once I got going, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm known as a course guy now, and I feel comfortable with that. That's my favorite thing to do. So same thing with the podcast.
So I did have a deadline. Just reminding me of your question. The deadline for this book, for the book that came out, was 2021, the end of 2021, and it came out on the 7th of December 2021, so pretty close to the end of the year. Like I couldn't really have got it out later than that, and I've set myself the end of 2022 to get the next 3 books out, and I'm working hard to make sure they don't all come out in December, because that's not very smart from a marketing point of view. So I've set myself internal deadlines in this year, and I think it is really important. Now because of who I am, I tend not to let the deadlines rule me. I had a kind of plan. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm just thinking of this aloud. Maybe I am letting the deadlines. Maybe this is one of my challenges. So like, it's important with kind of everything in life. This is a philosophical point thing. It's a bit like the constraints creativity thing. It's like, you have to have a bit of both. You have to. For me, I need the deadlines.
You need boundaries.
What to
choose. Otherwise, creativity it's like paint with no. As we're in the artistic mindset here. So if you just put paint on a flat surface, it's just going to go everywhere. But if you put it in a bowl, something that is going to contain it, that's otherwise, it's going to go everywhere. It's going to take forever. I found like with web design, you have clients who need their website up. So generally you're going to have a deadline to meet. You'll have some flexibility in there, but that is actually really good. I struggled with that when I became a course creator and what I do now, because it's like, I don't have to have any deadlines, but I've learned that I thrive with deadlines. I've got to give myself a deadline if it's going to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also how we make choices about what we do, right? Is one of the things is the deadline. It's like urgency and importance are both there. And we can give ourselves sometimes, mostly I think I don't know what I'd say, like modern societies, we're pretty good at working to what's urgent, but we're not so good at working to what's important. And one of the ways you can fix that, I'm just getting this thought now, right? Is you can create urgency for what's important by setting yourself a deadline. So essentially that's what I did with the writing practice, right? It's like, it's important for me to practice sharing things. It's not really urgent, and for me to practice writing, it's not really urgent, but it is urgent if I say, and then you're asking yourself, this is like a kind of, if I say I'm going to do it once a week, then I've created a deadline, right? If you say your book is going to come out or is going to be finished by June, then you've created a deadline. Then the only interesting thing is, there's a meta competency that I realized I have. This practice has really helped me develop, which is, are you able to keep the promises you make to yourself? If you are able to do that, then life is a really different place. If you are not able to do that, then that's something that's worth practicing. And that's a thing that having a weekly habit, like a writing practice, like, it doesn't really matter what it is, like that you can build that ability in yourself, because it's no good having, and I struggle with this with the book, like I'm saying, it's no good having a deadline if you don't do the thing that you've said you'll do by the deadline, right? Then it hasn't done its work.
We'll have to have a follow-up conversation on that idea of following through, because that's a biggie. Yeah. There's so many valuable principles of like just starting and finishing something. Just psychologically, it's so important to do that on a micro level with little projects and on a macro level with something big. So let's definitely plan around too. Because the second book, what's that one called again?
It's going to be how to keep going when you want to give up. So it's like
when you want to give up.
About that.
Yeah. That's it. Well, yeah. What a perfect follow-up to how to start when you're stuck. I love that. I'm super excited about that for sure. Well, awesome, Robbie. This has been great, man. I really think we've weaved in and out of a lot of the challenges that are probably super common for all creatives, web designers, authors, content creators, all the things that require creativity. We talked about constraints. We talked about a bunch of practical, tactical type of practices we can put into place, which have been really, really good. This definitely this made me feel better and made me feel inspired to conquer those when they come. Because it just came this week. Earlier this week, I had a little segment of content time and I just felt a little stuck, but I got over it pretty quickly because I'm used to it, which will come. I think everyone early in the journey, this is a good thing to listen to early on, especially because it'll prepare you for when it does come, and you're not a freak. You're not alone. It happens to everybody. But a lot of good stuff we covered in this, man. I have one final question for you. Before we get started though, where would you like people to go to find out more about you? Do you want to send them to the book, your podcast? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff to do with me really is at robbieswale.com. Swale is SWALE. The book is on Amazon and also in all kinds of other places. I think in the States you can get it on Barnes and Noble website, that kind of thing too, if people would rather. There's actually a thing that I haven't, I didn't mention this to you, so you can cut this out if you don't want to, but I've got available to people if they want it, a draft version of the fourth book in the series, which people can just have for free. And the reason for that is is for me, a lot of this was about for me, it's like that there are two key moments. There's the moment of starting, which we've talked a lot about. And then there's that piece that I hinted at, which is like, for some of us, sometimes it's the like pressing go button. Mm-hmm. And especially if that's your own business, if it's something you've created, it happens a bit less, I think, when you're doing work for other people, when you're doing client work, because I think for that keeping your promises to yourself or the ways we relate to others, that stuff is a bit easier. But when we're making something of our own, that moment of sharing the work, of like pressing go, that's quite important. And it's something that, for me, in some ways, what all this is about, all this work is about, how we change the world, right? And I believe that the way we change the world is people always starts with some fairly ordinary person starting something and having an idea and seeing it through. And sometimes those become Google or the light bulb, and sometimes they don't, and they become a little thing in a little corner of the world that no one's ever heard of except the 30 people in that corner who right. really value the coffee shop and go there every week or whatever it is. So that is another place, and I'll give you a link for that.
Where's that at? Because if you want to, we could do like robbieswale.com/Josh Hall. If you want to forward that over there to get that draft, or wherever you have that.
Let's do that. I don't have it handy. There's a link on my website, but I just don't have it in front of me to give it to you right now.
Okay. Yeah. Is that cool? Because we can put that in the show notes if you want to do just robbieswale.com/Josh Hall.
Yes, let's do that.
Because you're using WordPress, right?
I don't, I'm on Squarespace, which I regret, Squarespace. But I can easily do that.
That's all right. I didn't know if there was a redirect link or something. You could just link that over.
We'll do robbieswale.com/Josh Hall. So people can go there straight for that as well. That's great. Yeah. And
awesome.
but hit the book. And also I'm on all the social media. So find me on there if people want to. And I love starting conversations about people who are ready to make something and are having these battles. Like I always love having those conversations. So feel free to reach out. There's also actually a Facebook group a 12-minute method Facebook group if people want to dive in there too.
Awesome. Well, my final question was if you think maybe the best place to start would be some sort of like 12-minute weekly practice or daily practice or something like that, just to help people who are loaded up with ideas, but they want to focus on one thing. I guess my final question was, what do you think that one thing would be to help?
Yeah. So I love the weekly practice. I just think it gives like all the stuff it gave me the stuff that I wanted, which was to be someone who wrote regularly and also to be someone who could share things comfortably online. But it also gave me so much more. So the frame I would give people if they're going to think about doing that, I would absolutely recommend that kind of thing, is like something like, what would you of 5 years' time be really grateful to you of now that you started practicing, so that in 5 years' time, you've been practicing something 12 minutes a week for 5 years. And, that's my Duolingo story, right? I wanted to learn Spanish, wanted to do some languages for years. I loved it at school, but just stopped and never did anymore. And, I know that the most productive way for me to learn Spanish is definitely not Duolingo, right? It would be to have a tutor who did that. But I'd known that for many years and I'd done nothing about it. And at some point I started Duolingo and I kept going, and I'm now on a streak of like, I don't know, 1,300 days or something. And my Spanish is like mucho más mejor que if I'd never done it, right? That's probably the end. That's probably about as how good my Spanish is. But it's like me of 3 years time or 2 years time will be really grateful to me of 5 years of 3 years ago, 5 years ago then, that I've been doing something on that and not nothing. And that's how I would think about it. So like, who do you want to become, and what would that person be doing? And what would you of 5 years time be really grateful to you of now that you started practicing?
That's great. I know when I got started doing tutorials, I gave myself a 12-week window. Like I just light at the end of the tunnel. I said for 12 weeks, I'm going to do one tutorial on YouTube a week. And it was the best practice I could do. It was a weekly practice and I had light at the end of the tunnel. That really set the tone for doing content consistently for me. So I think that could probably go right in conjunction with what you said, something weekly, something that you can look back on and think, gosh, thank God I did that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Robbie, it gets time on your side.
Yeah, right. Well, this has been awesome, man. A lot of good. This was one of the most like psychological in-depth talks I've had on the podcast, which I really enjoyed because it's huge with creativity and getting stuff done. So definitely everyone check out How to Start With Your Stuck or When You're Stuck. And then we'll have the link at robbieswale.com/Josh Hall for everybody. And then I'm excited for round 2 when the book comes out, man. So hit me up when that's ready.
Absolutely love to. Thanks so much, Josh. It's been super fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Robbie.
Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.